I never paid much attention to the hushed talks about a secret hidden under the calm streets of Silvercrest. In every small town, rumors fly around. Tales of lost paths in the woods, mysterious tunnels beneath the local academy, and odd vanishings deep in the wild. In our town, people whispered about an unusual complex built in the late 1980s that somehow vanished from official records, leaving only murmurs among longtime residents. I, like most, dismissed these as idle gossip until the day I discovered the trapdoor. At the time, I worked as a junior environmental assistant for the county, tasked with checking water supplies and mapping neglected areas. One day, my duties brought me to the outskirts where abandoned industrial sites lay hidden under tangled growth. I was assigned to gauge the groundwater near an old mill, one of those forgotten buildings whose walls had long crumbled and windows lay shattered. The structure exuded a heavy mood, as if its past clung tightly to every broken surface. While inspecting the vicinity of the dilapidated mill, I stumbled upon a rusted circular cover concealed beneath thick ivy near a collapsed loading area. I wasn't looking for anything unusual that day. I was focused on taking routine readings amid heaps of twisted metal and scattered debris. Yet there it was, a solid, time-worn steel ring set into the ground, much like those seen in abandoned military bunkers. Faded, nearly indecipherable markings were stamped on its surface. I could just read MK 1993 access restricted after wiping away layers of dust and leaves. For a moment, I hesitated, unsure of what I was holding. The old tales of midnight shipments in the early 1990s, of short-term laborers who vanished without a trace, and of local inspectors who would not divulge any details, all came flooding back. Something about that trapdoor spoke to the very core of those rumors. I tugged lightly at the handle, but it refused to budge. I told myself it was best left alone, yet I could not shake off the burning urge to learn its secrets. Later that evening, I returned to the spot, this time armed with a crowbar, a pair of sturdy gloves, and a reliable flashlight. I set to work on the metal cover, and after nearly 20 minutes of straining against its stubborn resistance, it groaned open with a long, drawn-out sound. Below the trapdoor lay a ladder that descended into sheer darkness, a passage into an unknown realm. I took a moment to steady my resolve and slowly stepped onto the ladder, my every move deliberate as I began my descent. The air down there was dense with the odor of rust, stale earth, and a subtle hint of chemicals. My flashlight's narrow beam barely penetrated the gloom, revealing only rough concrete walls and uneven steps that creaked under each footfall. My mind raced with uncertainties. What if the rumors were more than simple gossip? What if this hidden place was as dangerous as some of the whispered warnings? Despite an inner urge to retreat, my curiosity pressed me onward, step by careful step, into a narrow passage that split unexpectedly into two diverging ways. One passage ended abruptly in a jumble of broken pipes and scattered rubble, while the other was swallowed by an unyielding darkness. Faint hand-painted signs pointed in two directions, one with the words Level 1 Storage and another reading Main Active Sector in chipped, faded letters. I chose the path toward the storage area, driven by a desire to see if any clues lay hidden among forgotten belongings. Inside the first room, an old metal door with peeling paint led me into a space filled with dusty shelves. Old storage boxes with faded labels and outdated equipment sat in disorganized rows. Papers lay strewn across the cold, damp floor. Many were smeared beyond recognition, though a few still bore legible notes. One such scrap read, Phase 2 rollout postponed pending safety upgrades, access for Level 3 personnel only, Incident 44B, notify Chief Engineer immediately. I quickly snapped a photo on my phone, my mind whirling with the implications of these cryptic instructions. At the far end of the room, I noticed a small generator, its metal casing dented and eaten away by corrosion, yet still emitting a feeble hum. I followed a tangle of cables that snaked out from the device and disappeared into a nearby wall. The realization struck me. Someone must have been keeping this place powered all along. The thought made my stomach tighten with apprehension, but I pressed on, determined to uncover every hidden detail. Slowly retracing my steps back into the passage, I began to notice subtle sounds I hadn't before. A soft, rhythmic tap echoed from deep within the structure, deliberate and measured. I paused to listen, realizing it wasn't a random clatter, but something almost methodical. My grip on the flashlight tightened, and I advanced cautiously further along the passage where the sound had originated. Soon the narrow path opened up into a spacious atrium with several smaller branches off to the sides. Dominating the center of the atrium was a large metal door, its surface marred by dents and scratches. Bold letters on it read, "Authorized personnel only," and above the door a small red security panel blinked steadily. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the door as I weighed whether to try and force it open or to retreat and gather more information. A louder, more insistent tap from the depths of the building compelled me to withdraw, so I reluctantly ascended the ladder back to the surface and closed the trapdoor behind me. Deep inside, I knew that there were too many questions left unanswered, and I would have to return. That night I lay awake at home, staring at my ceiling as thoughts of the hidden complex swirled relentlessly in my head. I couldn't stop imagining the stacks of dusty documents, the persistent hum of the generator, and the ominous red light that flashed from that locked door underground. My mind was filled with a mix of unease and determination. I resolved that the next day I would return with more preparation to finally expose the truth of what lay beneath Silvercrest. The following morning, I set out again. With a better camera, a fresh notebook, and an extra supply of tools packed in my bag, I made my way back to the trapdoor at the edge of the old mill's grounds. When I opened it this time, I immediately noticed differences. The red light above the metal door was off, and on the dusty ground were sets of small footprints that I did not recognize. I was sure of the deep impressions my own boots had left during my first visit, so these lighter tracks were disturbing in their contrast. They seemed to stop abruptly in the middle of the passage, as if whoever made them had vanished suddenly. And that vanished person was not a ghost from old stories. Quietly, I followed the trail, my mind abuzz with questions. Was someone else exploring these hidden depths, or had an intruder passed through recently? I continued through the passage until I found myself at the entrance to another room. This one appeared to be a storage area, with dusty shelves leaning precariously against the crumbling walls and piles of old files scattered across the floor. In one dim corner of the room, a weathered crate had been pried open. I knelt down and shined my light inside. The crate was crammed with bulky cables, heavy clamps, and a small corroded control unit with buttons worn smooth by time. Nothing about its contents made sense in the context of a mere abandoned storage room. It was as though someone had been methodically rummaging here not long ago. I documented every detail, snapping photos and scribbling notes in my journal. The low, constant hum of the generator resumed its presence at the back of the room, mingling with my racing thoughts. My eyes then caught sight of tangled wires disappearing into a solid wall. There was something purposeful about the way they vanished, hinting at concealed power lines and hidden mechanisms still in operation after all these years. My curiosity was irresistibly drawn deeper into the mystery. Almost imperceptibly, I began to hear a soft, metallic clink echoing from somewhere beyond the storage room. I paused and stood utterly still, straining to pinpoint its direction. The sound grew fainter before drifting away, as if the source was moving further into the dark recesses of the complex. Every logical part of me warned that it was best to leave, but the thought that someone or something else was here with their own intentions urged me to investigate further. Gathering my resolve, I left the storage room and started along a branching passage that led to what I assumed was a research lab. The passage seemed less chaotic than the storage areas I had already explored. Its walls were cleaner, and the floor was less littered with debris. After a few careful turns, I reached a narrow door, left slightly ajar, that emitted a soft, flickering light. I pushed it open gently and stepped inside. The room was set up much like a modest laboratory, a cramped space with worn tables covered in glass containers and outdated equipment. The smell of disinfectant and chemicals filled the air, and I could see on one of the walls a whiteboard plastered with awkward diagrams and hurried notes. In the center of a cluttered table lay a thick folder with the title Operation Echo Phase 2, printed in bold, dark letters. My hands trembled as I opened the file, revealing pages filled with technical jargon and scribbled safety protocols. Although most of the text was dense and confusing, one section jumped out. It warned that under any breach of containment, a controlled shutdown would be mandatory, and that only a top clearance team should intervene. The document even hinted that a failure in containing the experiment could lead to catastrophic outcomes. I carefully photographed the pages without touching the original too much, and then closed the folder. My attention was immediately drawn to a large glass chamber stationed near the far end of the lab. Its surface was misted over, and a thin crack stretched along its side, with a barely perceptible drip of fluid running down. I studied the chamber from a safe distance, feeling that its presence, and the danger it implied, was best not disturbed further. I left the lab without further delay, my thoughts buzzing with questions about what exactly had been studied in this secret facility. Exiting into the larger passage once more, I tried to retrace my steps when I heard unmistakable footsteps echoing softly from behind me. I instinctively crouched in a shaded recess, switching off my flashlight to avoid drawing attention. I soon saw two individuals approaching along the passage. One of them held a small portable lamp that swung slowly from side to side, while the other carried a clipboard and spoke quietly in measured tones about checking the storage room and confirming that Level 2 was clear. Their voices were low but purposeful, suggesting they were not mere trespassers, but part of an organized team. I remained hidden until their conversation faded into the distance before I slipped out to continue my investigation. Once I was safely on my own, I moved steadily toward the exit trapdoor. The network of passages in the underground base felt like a vast labyrinth built to hide secrets. Every narrow step, every creak of the old metal or stone contributed to a growing sense of foreboding, but it also deepened my resolve to unravel the mystery. At last, I reached the ladder and climbed up to the dim night air above ground. Outside, the facility appeared as a faint glow amid the overgrown brush and tangled weeds. I closed the trap door behind me, already planning my next return to answer the questions that still haunted me. Over the next few days, I could think of little else. I spent restless nights reviewing the photographs and notes, trying to piece together a coherent narrative from the scattered clues. The more I learned, the more I began to suspect that the hidden complex was not a mere abandoned relic, but a carefully maintained government secret. The clandestine lab, the working generator, and the presence of security personnel all pointed to an active site that was meant to stay hidden, and above all, under control. Soon I decided that my next venture would involve a full exploration of the inner levels. I returned one foggy morning with improved equipment. A digital camera with a high-resolution zoom lens, a sturdy notebook with extra battery packs, and even a handheld recorder for any unusual sounds. This time I planned a more systematic search, hoping to document every detail and piece together the complete story behind what had been designated Operation Echo. I descended once more through the old trapdoor. The ladder creaked under my weight as I stepped down into the familiar blackness. The air here felt even colder, carrying an earthy scent that reminded me of damp soil mixed with metal. I moved slowly along the narrow passage, now even more aware of the fine layer of dust underfoot. Every step I took was careful as I scanned the walls for any markings or clues left by others who might have explored this hidden world. The passage soon branched in two again. I chose the left-hand path, which felt slightly better, lit by my flashlight's beam. As I advanced, I noticed something that made my heart skip. A series of small, fresh tracks in the dust that did not match my own. They were delicate, suggesting the steps of someone in light shoes. The impressions stopped suddenly, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. I felt a growing sense of urgency mixed with the need for caution as I followed the trail further down. Eventually, the path led me to a narrow room that served as a kind of resting space. The space was sparse, a couple of narrow bunks pushed against one wall and a roughly hewn wooden table in the center covered with scattered playing cards and a chipped, stained mug. A small wall-mounted display unit sputtered static on its screen, its feeble light casting long, wavering shadows. On a rickety desk nearby lay an open notebook, its pages filled with frantic scribbles. Almost every line of handwriting repeated a single, jarring message. Containment is failing, specimen adapting. I leaned in to study the hurried scrawl, my hands shaking as I tried to make sense of the jumbled notes. The scribbled pages became more erratic as I flipped through them, each subsequent sheet showing signs of panic and disarray. Amid phrases like exposure risk and unplanned emergency shutdown, one recurring line sent a shiver of apprehension through me. Any breach could lead to catastrophic collapse. I took care to photograph every page, knowing that these fragments of recording might be vital evidence of what had been left unresolved in this secret facility. Just then, I heard a slight noise, a faint shuffling sound as if someone was moving just outside the small room. I pressed myself against the closed door, holding my breath. For long seconds, I lay still in the oppressive silence, straining to capture any further sounds. After what felt like an eternity, the shuffling stopped. I slowly emerged, careful not to make any noise, and peered back into the darkened hallway beyond the room. Down that passage, I noticed two individuals standing at a junction where the path split into two directions. One of them held a small light that they swept methodically across the area, while the other consulted a clipboard and murmured instructions about checking Sector B before regrouping. Their words were low but firm, leaving no room for doubt that they were there on official business. I backed away silently, deciding that it was time to withdraw and plan my next steps rather than risk being caught. After escaping the immediate vicinity, I carefully retraced my route back toward the ladder that led to the trapdoor. My mind was awash with conflicting thoughts, fear, curiosity, and a desperate need to learn more about what had been kept hidden under Silvercrest. Every detail, from the fresh tracks to the chaotic notebook entries, pointed toward a secret that someone was actively protecting. I climbed upward and sealed the trapdoor behind me, though deep inside I knew I would be returning soon. Over the next several days, the images and documents I had collected began to form a disturbing picture. I spent hours poring over every detail on my laptop, trying to piece together the timeline and purpose of the underground facility. The scattered documents frequently mentioned Operation Echo and described a series of experiments that aimed to harness an adaptive form of biological engineering. The language was technical and laced with warnings about uncontrollable consequences if the engineered organism ever broke free of its confines. With every reread, the implications grew more dire. The experiments were designed with the intention of keeping a dangerous, living project under strict control, a task that had clearly failed. The writings implied that if containment were ever compromised, the results would be disastrous on a massive scale. I quickly realized that this was not just some long-forgotten research project. It was a living threat, a hidden menace that might still be active beneath our town. As night fell once again, I found no peace even within the safety of a distant motel room. I paced around the small space, rewatching my photos and notes. The evidence was overwhelming. There were signs of recent activity deep within the facility, suggesting that either someone else had been there not long before me, or that whatever was contained might be stirring. Every now and then, a new email notification or a blinking message on my burner laptop made my pulse race with a mix of adrenaline and fear. Then one cold, quiet night, while I was meticulously organizing the digital files and writing down my final thoughts, I received a stark text message. Its contents were simple, but terrifying. Do not seek the trapdoor. Do not try to unveil what lies beneath. If it finds you, escape will be impossible. I read and reread that message until its meaning sank in. It wasn't a vague threat. It was a direct order meant to stop anyone from investigating any further. I knew then that my journey was far from over. The hidden facility's danger was not limited to its physical structure. It extended into the very shadows of our everyday life. The more I learned, the more I understood that powerful people were determined to keep these secrets buried. They would stop at nothing to ensure that no one else discovered the truth about the experiments that had once been conducted under the banner of Operation Echo. For the next few days, I found myself moving from town to town, never staying long in one place. I used a burner laptop purchased from a secondhand store and transferred my files onto several encrypted drives, storing them in multiple online locations. Every move was calculated. I had to assume that my actions were being watched. I meticulously planned every exit, every route, knowing that even a small misstep could cost me everything. Late one evening, while hunkered down in a cramped guest house under a false name, I reviewed the encrypted files one last time. Among the technical jargon and safety protocols, a particular passage caught my eye. It described a specimen that displayed rapid evolutionary changes under minimal external influence. Though the text was clinical in tone, the implications were chilling. If this specimen were ever allowed to escape its confines, it could rapidly adapt and overwhelm its surroundings. The phrase, "potential for catastrophic biohazard," punctuated the document, and I could hardly breathe as I realized that what was once contained might now be on the loose. In the days that followed, anxiety and exhaustion became constant companions. I began to understand that the hidden experiment was not a relic of the past, but a present and growing threat. Every time I turned on my laptop or checked my burner phone, I felt as though unseen eyes were tracking my every move. I did my best to rationalize my fear by reminding myself that I had the evidence to expose the truth, but a persistent unease gnawed at me. Then, one dismal night 3 days after leaving my previous safe haven, a sharp knock shattered the fragile calm of my temporary room. It was louder this time, and unlike before, it was accompanied by a clear call using my real name. "Mr. Camden, we need to talk." That single sentence confirmed that my pursuers had identified me, and they would not let me disappear quietly. I had no time to deliberate. I hastily packed my most important belongings, including the encrypted drives and my handwritten journal, and crept out of the bathroom window onto the fire escape. I descended quickly over the cold metal stairs, listening as the sounds of the knocks and the scraping of tools on the door faded behind me. As soon as I reached the ground, I merged with the dark streets, blending into the shadows. Every step was a race against time as I moved between empty alleys and side streets until I reached my prearranged getaway vehicle parked some distance away. I jumped into the car and drove off, taking winding back roads and avoiding any major routes. My mind was in turmoil as I wondered if I should warn someone or let the evidence speak for itself. Hour after hour, the quiet highway stretched out before me as I wrestled with the gravity of the secret I now carried. What I had seen below Silvercrest was not a series of abandoned relics. It was an active, meticulously hidden government operation. The agents I had encountered were not random wanderers, but highly trained operatives intent on keeping the project under lock and key. Even now, despite my rapid escape, I felt that they could be closing in at any moment. Finally, when the first weak rays of dawn broke over the horizon, I reached a small, out-of-the-way motel on the edge of a remote highway. I paid in cash and registered under a false name. In the dim, flickering light of my room, I locked the door and secured it with a chair wedged firmly against it. I sank into an old chair by a rickety desk and began sorting through the hundreds of photos and documents on my burner laptop. Each image and every page of the handwritten journal served as a stark reminder of the unimaginable secret that lay buried beneath Silvercrest. I spent the morning uploading my files to multiple cloud storage services and emailing copies to a handful of trusted friends. Yet even as I finished my work, an ominous sensation crept over me. My internet connection suddenly cut out. The router's steady blinking lights continued as if nothing was amiss, but my devices all showed no signal. A feeling of deep disquiet set in, and I double-checked every connection, finding nothing to explain the disruption. That afternoon, while I was reconfiguring my backup settings and verifying that the crucial documents were safe, a sharp, insistent knock hit my motel door. My heart raced, not in a dramatic way, but with intense anxiety. I quickly recalled the earlier threat and knew that I was under surveillance. I looked through the peephole and saw a vague silhouette of someone in dark clothing. The voice that followed was low, yet insistent. "Mr. Camden, we must talk now." I immediately realized that there was no time to debate. I gathered my most essential belongings, tucked my encrypted drives, and slipped out of the back window onto the narrow alley behind the motel. Under the pale light of a flickering street lamp, I made my way along deserted sidewalks, every sense alert to the possibility of pursuit. I moved quickly, frequently glancing over my shoulder, until I finally managed to board a crowded late-night bus that I hoped would help me vanish into a sea of unknown faces. I found a seat in the back, my mind reeling with thoughts about what to do next. I knew that the information I carried was explosive, a detailed account of a dangerous experiment that had once been buried underground, but now might be free. For the next few days, I traveled furtively, hopping between small towns and motels, each new location chosen carefully to avoid detection. I used public payphones and burner laptops to check my messages, never staying long enough in one place to be noticed. Always the threat of the unknown force I had uncovered loomed in my thoughts. What if the experiment, once controlled and hidden, was now ready to break free of its constraints and wreak havoc upon an unsuspecting populace? In a nondescript town far from Silvercrest, I arranged to meet one of the few friends I trusted with my secret. We met in a quiet cafe, speaking in hushed tones over coffee about the strange events that had transpired. I explained everything in detail: the old mill, the trapdoor, the secret rooms, and the ominous documents outlining Operation Echo. My friend listened intently, his eyes growing wider as I recounted the unnerving details. He warned me that if word got out, I would be in serious danger and urged me to lay low until he could verify my claims independently. Even so, a part of me knew I couldn't let it end with fear. I had to expose what was hidden, no matter the cost. Over the following weeks, I continued gathering and organizing every scrap of evidence. I began to notice that wherever I stayed, I was shadowed by the impression that I was being watched. I often caught glimpses of dark silhouettes at the edge of my vision, and unfamiliar cars would appear on the same rural roads I had taken for my escape. Every unfamiliar sound and sudden movement fed my growing suspicion that forces far more powerful than a simple government department were at work. One chilly evening, while I was poring over documents in a dim motel room, a subtle notification popped up on my burner laptop. It was an encrypted email from an unknown sender, warning, "Do not pursue the trap door. Do not seek the hidden complex. If you continue, you will become a target." The email contained only that single, stark sentence. No explanation, no signature, nothing more. Though I could not tell if it was meant as a threat or an attempt to help me avoid danger, the message only steeled my resolve. I printed a copy of the message and tucked it safely in my journal, determined not to let fear derail my mission. I began spending even more time reviewing the technical documents, meticulously translating the acronyms and numerical codes that recurred throughout the files. It seemed that Operation Echo had been designed as a long-term study in adaptive biology, a sort of experiment in creating an organism that could evolve in real time under stress. The documents were careful to note that any breach of the safety measures would lead to uncontrollable propagation, a phrase that sent a shiver of apprehension through me. I convinced myself that the risk was enormous, and that if this organism were ever to be released, the consequences could be dire for everyone. Driven by both the need for truth and the fear of the unknown, I began mapping out the structure of the underground base from memory and my collected notes. I drew rough sketches of the interconnected rooms, the narrow passages, and the several major areas: the storage room, the research lab, and a large chamber filled with glass panels that housed various specimens. I noted that in one of these panels a large crack seemed to be forming with a slow trickle of an amber fluid. The images of that container haunted my dreams, representing in my mind a tangible sign that the danger was real and possibly imminent. I spent countless hours cross-referencing dates and names mentioned in the documents with old newspaper clippings and archived municipal records. Although I could find little solid confirmation of the facility's existence in public records, subtle hints began to emerge here and there, a mention of an obsolete research site in a city council meeting report, an unaccounted-for entry in municipal maps, and even a reference in an old interview with a retired official. These fragments, though vague, added yet another layer to the puzzle, suggesting that something significant had indeed taken place beneath Silvercrest decades ago. Every new discovery, every painstaking connection made between scattered clues only deepened the mystery. I realized that this was far more than a fleeting urban legend. It was an intricate network of secrets engineered and concealed behind layers of bureaucracy and deliberate omission. As I compiled everything into my journal, I felt both empowered by the truth and overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I had uncovered. I had to decide whether to risk everything by going public or to retreat and hide what I knew from prying eyes, uncertain of who else might already be moving against me. Late one night, When the wind howled outside my temporary safe house and rain battered the windows, I made up my mind. I could not simply bury the truth. I had to prepare for the possibility that the dangerous specimen might already be active, and that the forces controlling it would stop at nothing to keep it secret. I began drafting a report, a detailed account of my findings, and planned to send it to several journalists and independent researchers known for their fearless investigations. I composed the document slowly and carefully, ensuring every detail was backed up by photos, notes, and scanned copies of the original documents. That report became my lifeline, a manifesto of truth against a looming dark conspiracy that spanned decades. Every sentence I wrote carried the weight of many silent years, and each new paragraph made me more resolute in my decision to expose the hidden horror that had been locked away. I knew that if I was discovered while compiling this report, it might very well be my last act of defiance. Yet the pressing need to warn the world overshadowed all personal fear. I kept revisiting the images of the glass chamber in the underground complex, the one that housed what was labeled Specimen Delta. That container had held something that was both human-like and unmistakably wrong. Its silhouette was disjointed, its limbs too long, its skin almost translucent with dark veins visible beneath. I often found myself staring at that picture on my phone, reeling from the implications of an engineered being that looked so out of place in any natural order. The accompanying notes had warned that this specimen was to remain dormant at all costs, and yet the possibility that it had been inadvertently or even intentionally released filled me with a dread I could not ignore. One particularly stormy evening, as I reviewed a final set of documents that described emergency shutdown protocols, I heard an unexpected sound outside my safe house door. It was not the scrape of footsteps, but a low, vibrating hum that reverberated through the floor. I glanced at my computer screen. The digital clock showed nearly midnight. Taking a deep breath, I decided that this was the moment to act. I knew that if I stayed any longer, the forces keeping this secret might come looking for me. I gathered my most critical items, the laptop with the report, several encrypted drives, and my personal journal, then slipped out quietly into the stormy night. I walked swiftly along empty streets, the rain drenching me as I made my way to a predetermined meeting point with a contact I trusted. I had arranged to pass on everything I had collected to a small group of investigative journalists who had a reputation for exposing government misconduct. Under the cloak of darkness, I met with my contact at a deserted bus station. We exchanged few words, only silent nods and quick glances, before I handed over a secure drive containing every photograph, every scanned document, and my long, painstakingly composed report on Operation Echo. Even as I made that desperate exchange, I could not shake the feeling that I had set in motion events that could not be undone. The drive I had handed over was not only evidence, it was a promise that the truth would out, regardless of the risks. My contact assured me that the files would be thoroughly examined and that the story, once confirmed, would force those responsible to answer for their secrets. I left the meeting with a heavy heart, more burdened by responsibility than ever before. After the exchange, I rode a series of buses across quiet back roads that twisted through dark, lonely landscapes. I was not entirely sure where I was headed, only that I had to vanish from anyone who might be tracking me. I switched vehicles more times than I could count, each time discarding old phone numbers and adopting new aliases. I spent long, sleepless nights in cheap motels, obsessively checking my surroundings before I allowed myself a few hours of rest. The constant pressure of being hunted made every sound and every shadow seem to carry a hidden threat. In one particularly desolate town far from Silvercrest, I found a temporary refuge at a nondescript motel. I rented a room using cash, and for a while I tried to assemble a semblance of safety, double-checking locks, covering windows, and keeping a burner phone close at hand at all times. I organized all my findings into a detailed dossier, arranging them in a way that even a non-expert might begin to understand the gravity of the situation. I even recorded a few audio notes as I spoke aloud my theories and warnings, hoping that the clarity of my own voice might somehow break through the paralyzing fear. I began to realize that what I had uncovered was not an isolated case of secret research gone awry. It was part of a larger, ongoing project that likely involved other covert sites across the country. Rumors, once merely whispers in coffee shops, now took on a more ominous tone, hinting that similar facilities might be hidden under other small towns and rural areas. The thought that such dangerous experiments could be scattered like buried landmines across the nation was almost too overwhelming to grasp. Yet I could not turn away. I had made a choice to expose the dark underbelly of this concealed operation, no matter the personal cost. One night, after spending hours reviewing a particularly dense set of technical blueprints and safety manuals in my motel room, I made a startling discovery. Amid the jargon and abbreviations, I found a reference to adaptive bioengineering that indicated the experiment was not static, but designed to evolve with its surroundings. It noted that the specimen's genetic material was programmed to change if ever exposed to a certain range of stimuli, a fact that explained the fluctuating readings I had seen in the underground chambers. The documents warned that if the experiment ever escaped its controlled environment, it could adapt rapidly, leaving minimal chance for containment. I couldn't help but imagine the possibility that something dangerous might already be on the move, adapting unseen as it slowly broke free of its artificial shackles. These revelations drove me to work feverishly to compile every scrap of data into a coherent narrative. I spent day after day typing out long reports, annotating diagrams, and creating time-stamped notes of my own experiences. I even began recording my daily thoughts in a leather-bound journal, hoping that these personal reflections might one day serve as testimony of what I had endured. But as I wrote, I realized that time was short. The anonymous messages, the increasing instances of unexplained encounters on the road, and a growing suspicion that I was being followed, all told me that I was running out of options. Late in the afternoon one day, while reviewing a final draft of my report in the dim light of my temporary workspace, I heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel outside the building. I froze, listening intently as the sound receded into silence. For a brief moment, I thought I might have been too hasty in leaving my room unsecured. I checked my burner phone repeatedly, but there were no new messages, only that solitary warning from before, still etched into my memory. It was then that I decided I would no longer remain stationary. I had to keep moving, to stay one step ahead of those who sought to silence the truth. I arranged to leave the motel and take refuge in a new town several hundred miles away, one where I had no past and no connections that could be traced. I rented a car using a pseudonym, packed a small bag with only the essentials, and began a long, solitary drive under an overcast sky. The highways were nearly empty, and I used every chance to change direction and throw off any potential trackers. In the quiet hum of the engine and the muted colors of the passing landscape, I had time to think about what I had done and what might still come. In the muted light of dusk, I finally found a new refuge in a rural stretch of road. The small town I reached was nondescript, with a few scattered houses and a long-forgotten diner at its center. I checked into a roadside motel under yet another false identity and spent the night immersed in my thoughts. I realized that even if the evidence were to eventually see the light of day, the people behind these experiments held a power that could bury the story again. There was no guarantee of safety if the truth were to be revealed. On the contrary, exposing it might bring more danger to those who dared speak out. I spent the following days mapping out everything I knew about Operation Echo. I reconstructed the timeline of events from the early days of the experimental facility to its eventual abandonment, as it was officially labeled, and noted down the discrepancies that hinted at ongoing activity. I compared these notes with distant memories of whispered local legends, gradually seeing a pattern in the fragments. Each detail, no matter how small, contributed to a tapestry of hidden research that spanned decades, a clandestine project that had managed to stay hidden in plain sight beneath small towns like Silvercrest. In the safety of my new surroundings, I dedicated long hours to compiling my report into a coherent manuscript. I meticulously organized every photograph, every handwritten note, and every digital file into chapters that described my discoveries chronologically. I even drafted a conclusion that warned anyone who might try to follow the clues. Do not search for the trapdoor. Do not attempt to uncover what lies beneath. For if it finds you, there will be no escape. That final line haunted me every time I read it, a dire reminder that the hidden menace might already be stirring in the dark. I ended each day by looking up at the stars, wondering if somewhere beneath that silent night, the secrets I had uncovered roamed free. I resisted the urge to believe in the old warnings that had once been dismissed as fanciful tales. Now, each flicker of distant light, each unexpected noise, and every shadow in the corners of my vision carried the weight of what I had seen below Silvercrest. I wrote down these thoughts in my journal, not as a record of fear, but as a solemn promise to never let the truth be buried again. Weeks turned into months as I continued to live in exile, always on guard, always moving. I passed my time researching similar facilities in old news archives and distant government records. Each new piece of evidence reinforced the notion that Operation Echo was not unique. There were hints of parallel projects, hidden in other corners of the country, all designed with similar principles of adaptive biology. I discovered faint references to mysterious shutdowns, unexplained disappearances, and even rumors of secret containment breaches, all echoing the same unnerving possibility that a dangerous experiment had been set loose. Though I never felt completely safe, I knew that my work was far from in vain. I began corresponding with a network of independent journalists and researchers who specialized in unearthing government secrets. Our email exchanges were careful and encrypted, and we built a small but dedicated community dedicated to exposing these hidden operations. In every message and document, I stressed the importance of not attempting to physically locate the trapdoor or the underground facility. Do not go looking for it, I wrote repeatedly. For if you do, you risk becoming part of the horror that has been allowed to fester in the dark. I also made sure to back up all of my evidence in multiple formats and locations. I stored copies on encrypted USB drives, uploaded them to secure cloud storage services, and even mailed a hard copy to a trusted colleague across the country. I wanted to ensure that if I ever disappeared, or worse, these files would remain accessible to those who cared enough to expose the truth. Every measure I took was a bet against the forces that sought to silence this information for good. One cold morning, as I was scribbling down new observations in my journal in a tiny rented cabin far from any city lights, I sensed a presence outside. I peered through the frosted window but saw only the misty outlines of trees. Nevertheless, an inexplicable feeling told me that I wasn't alone. I couldn't shake the thought that my movements were being monitored, even in this remote place. I quickly gathered my things and left the cabin under cover of fog, blending into the uncertain mist as I drove away without looking back. The danger was now a constant companion. I learned to read every unexpected sound, every change in the pattern of tires on the roadside. I even found myself checking over my shoulder during quiet moments at a gas station or when I stopped to eat at a roadside diner. The simple act of traveling became a daily challenge, a constant battle between the need for safety and the weight of the secret I carried. And yet, despite the terror and uncertainty, I could not turn away from my mission to bring the truth to light. After months of careful planning, I began to draft a final statement meant for public release. A complete account of my journey, the hidden facility, the dangerous experiments, and the looming threat of a creature engineered to adapt beyond human control. It was a document that I hoped would spark a wider investigation and force those responsible to face public scrutiny. In drafting this statement, I wrote with a clarity that I had not felt since I first descended into the depths under Silvercrest. Every detail was laid out meticulously. The trapdoor, the hidden passages, the abandoned storage rooms, the makeshift research lab, the chamber with specimens, the eerie technical notes on adaptive bioengineering, and the unmistakable evidence that something dangerous might have been released. On the final page of my report, I sealed my words with a dire warning meant for anyone who might think of following in my footsteps. I do not know where it will appear first, but one truth is undeniable. Nothing will stop it from seeking its unknown aim. I hope that this final sentence would serve as a warning to all, a beacon for the truth, and a safeguard for those who might otherwise fall victim to the concealed menace. I then sent out my final report to the network of journalists and kept a copy on my encrypted drives in multiple secure locations. With that, I knew my life had changed irrevocably. I no longer belonged to the quiet world I once knew. I was now an unwilling guardian of a dark secret, a secret that the powers behind Operation Echo would do anything to keep hidden. Even as I continue to travel and live in the shadows, I find solace only in the thought that truth, however buried, always finds a way to emerge. And though I must remain vigilant, ever wary of the eyes that hunt me in the dark, I am determined to ensure that the story of that hidden facility is never forgotten. I have learned sometimes at a perilous cost that some mysteries are not meant to be left alone, and that silence can be as dangerous as the unknown itself. This is my story, a story of discovery, of danger, and of the unyielding will to unearth what many would rather keep hidden. To anyone who reads these words, I urge you, do not attempt to search for the trapdoor. Do not try to lift the veil of secrecy if you are not prepared for the consequences. Some truths are meant only for those who dare to face their worst fears. And if what I have uncovered stirs again from the depths of that underground labyrinth, it may bring with it a storm that spares no one. I now pass on this manuscript as a final act of defiance, a call to those who value transparency and safety over silence and secrecy. The legacy of Operation Echo, with its dangerous experiment and its well-guarded secrets, is not something that should ever be allowed to disappear under a shroud of official denial. It is a reminder that behind every abandoned building and every silent rumor, there might lurk a truth too powerful to ignore. I leave you with these words, not only as a farewell, but as a final warning. The hidden menace lives, and its pursuit is relentless. I have done all I can to document its existence, to preserve its details for posterity, and to ensure that if it ever breaks free completely, the world will know where it began. I do not know where it will surface next, but I am certain that it will stop at nothing to reach its goal. This is the story of my descent into the darkness beneath Silvercrest, of a journey marked by discovery, terror, and an unwavering quest for truth. I have risked everything to bring forth the evidence, to shine a light on a secret that has festered in the shadows for far too long. And now, with every word recorded and every file secured, I trust that the truth will outlast those who seek to bury it once more. May these words serve as both a warning and a guide for anyone who might one day find themselves drawn to the hidden depths of a forgotten past. Do not be fooled by the quiet of your hometown or the simplicity of its daily life. Beneath the surface, secrets can lie dormant for decades, and when they awaken, nothing will ever be the same again.